You're listening to the Fertility Docs Uncensored podcast, featuring insight on all things fertility from some of the top-rated doctors around America. Whether you're struggling to conceive or just planning for your future family, we're here to guide you every step of the way.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Carrie Bedient with another episode of Fertility Docs Uncensored. Bum, bum, bum.
Make me laugh, Carrie, when you do that.
I am joined here by my lovely, delightful, and beautifully attired colleague, Dr. Abby Eblen from Nashville Fertility Center. Abby, please tell the folks at home what you're wearing.
Well, I'm wearing Joanne fabric t-shirt with my new cricket design. We don't want to tell our producer, Brandy, but I pulled the graphic design off our website, our Fertility Docs uncensored kind of logo with the woman and her lips and all that. And I pulled it off and I was able to use my cricket to actually make it an iron-on transfer. So I now have a yellow t-shirt with our logo on it. So I proudly displayed that today at the beginning of our broadcast.
There you have it, folks. She's beautiful. She's beautifully attired. She's smart. She's talented. She has it all.
Man, we also have my ego up.
We also have the lovely and enchanting fiery redhead of Dr. Susan Hudson of the Texas Fertility Center here gracing us with our presence. How are you, Susan?
I am so good today. Any day that I get to sit here and chit chat with y'all, it just brightens my day. It really does.
It does make for a good day.
So sweet.
It does, because I'm usually not smiling this much when we're at the very beginning. Well, and I'm usually, just like about to roll over.
And usually, if you guys are like I am, I hardly ever see my partners in practice. We're so busy seeing our own patients that we don't get to talk to each other. So this is actually kind of like, almost like kind of being on a little snippet of a girls' trip, kind of, it's kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
It is.
We just need a little wine, maybe.
Hey, we could do the drunk history? We could do drunk reproductive endocrinology.
Okay, I don't know drunk history.
There's, I don't actually know it either. I don't know if it's a TV show or a YouTube show or something, but I've heard of it before. Therefore, it must exist, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And the premise of it?
It's historians getting intoxicated and going through history and telling the...
Where do you come up with this stuff?
I've never heard of this before. If I came up with that, I'm sure I would be a gazillionaire by now because I would have a hot TV show talking about the War of 1812 while intoxicated.
Our patients may not want to come see us if they think we're drinking after hours, intoxicated. So that may not be good for business, Carrie.
Our patients may want to come see us even more if they know we're drinking after hours.
Well, that's okay. Yeah.
I didn't say during hours. We are all stone cold,
we are good,
sober, calculating machines during work.
That's right.
Yeah. Work hard and play hard.
Yes. Well, I don't know. Maybe work hard and sleep hard is more my style.
And we are broadcasting after hours now, so we really should have some wine. I mean, it's 8:00 right now in Central Time here, so we really should have some wine.
Well, I mean, Abby, your family is actually the one that's doing all the risky activity this week.
Oh my gosh, I tell you, I am not much of a risk taker. Although I will say, and I didn't tell you guys this earlier, but earlier this summer, I went to camp with my daughter as one of the leaders. And so actually rappelled down a 5-story tower. I did do that.
There's a difference between 5 feet and 5 stories.
I was told it was 5 feet, but it was 5 stories, 60 feet actually. And so that really terrified me. And so I really was so proud of myself because I rappelled down this, like tower that you'd see like somebody from the military, going down. So I felt really proud of myself until about, a few weeks ago, my husband and my son, who's now 18, were talking about going skydiving, and they've talked about that periodically. And so I've always told them, I said, just don't let me know because I'll worry about you. And I just don't want to know. And so about 3 days ago, I got a phone call as I was wrapping things up at work at about 6:30. And my husband said, well, we survived. Anyway, they ended up going skydiving. They jumped out of an airplane at 14,000 feet. And
wow.
It makes my heart stop just looking at the video of it. I cannot imagine actually doing that.
The airplane wasn't on fire?
No, and there are a lot of people in the airplane too. Not, socially distanced, I should say. But there's like 10 or 15 other people that were doing it. I'm like, who in the world would do that?
The other night, my husband and I and our oldest son were watching Air Force One. And I hadn't seen Air Force One in 15, 20 years or something. Funny thing is, it's rated R, and it really shouldn't be rated R because there's PG-13 things that are worse than Air Force One.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It was funny. We always use Common Sense Media whenever we're trying to watch something old that we think is fine, because you filter out stuff and it's like, it didn't quite come across that way when I was that age. Mm-hmm. So, and as a parent, you're like, oh crap. So we're watching Air Force One. And,
Christmas Vacation would be a great example of that.
And so there's the scene where they're jumping out of Air Force One with parachutes and stuff like this. And I turned to my son and I was like, I never really desire to jump out of an airplane with a parachute, but I even more don't want to be in a situation where jumping out of an airplane and a parachute is the best of the two options.
Oh, geez.
Oh, I think I would be like a cat climbing up a curtain. If I was about to tandem jump with somebody, I think I'd be like trying to cling onto the plane and hold on.
But it's one of those things, like, I don't think I could go up in a plane and jump out. Now, if there was like an emergency and it was literally like jump out of the airplane with a parachute.
Fire, maybe.
Like, I think in an emergency I could do it, but like, I don't think I could do it as like, hey, it's on my bucket list, I need to do it type thing.
It is not on my bucket list at all.
No.
What about you, Carrie? Could you jump out of a plane?
No. Why? No.
I've never been parasailing. Silly. Have any of y'all been parasailing?
No, but that sounds like fun to me.
Well, one of my best friends went parasailing, and after they finished, they were like, yeah, we should have maybe thought about that one a little bit more too. Like it looks like one of those really fun things. Theoretically, not, you're gliding over water, but you're going fast enough and high enough that,
Yeah, and I tell you, when they were parachuting down, I said, did it feel like you were going really fast? And they were like, oh yeah. And apparently they were going around 130 miles an hour, free falling basically, until they opened the chute. And then when the chute opened, they shot way up. I mean, it was like a big shoot up. And then from that point on, I think it was kind of a slow descend down. But if you're free falling 130 miles an hour, that's just not fun. So that would terrify me.
I have a practical question, and I don't necessarily need an answer to this because, Abby, this is your husband and your son.
Yes.
But so you're parachuting and you've got all of the straps and harnesses on and all that stuff. And typically they've got the straps that are going to go around your legs, kind of under in between your legs. So if you're going 130 miles an hour and then that parachute goes out and you stop, and you suddenly go up 10 miles an hour, that's going to pinch some important pieces.
I hate to reveal too much about my husband, but that was exactly what the worst part of it was. That he said that was the absolute worst part of the whole parachuting experience for him. Otherwise, he had a great time and probably is going to do it again. But yeah, that was uncomfortable.
Okay. So on that note, as we're talking about ways to damage one's own genetic material, let's talk about genetic testing that's available in fertility treatment.
That was a good lead in. I really like that. Awesome.
Can we do our question of the day real quick though?
Yes. Oh, Susan, you always keep us honest on that.
She keeps us straight on that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead and read the question off. So currently the question is, Susan.
The question is, in light of everything that's happening with COVID-19, are there any guidelines or ideas of what's a good idea, what's good to do, and what's not good to do?
Don't get it.
Yeah, don't get it. Yeah, and just the tricky thing is, I tell my patients there's no one that has gotten pregnant and carried a baby for 9 months that had COVID-19 to start off with because it hadn't been around that long. And so the problem is we don't really know how it affects a pregnancy. And generally, if you get infected with something in the first trimester, that's it's the most critical, most problems, most damage. And so I think right now, nobody really knows for sure. We don't have any evidence that it's teratogenic, but we don't really know that. I think the most recent thing that's really come out, which kind of stands to reason, that, pregnant women don't have a lot of lung capacity, particularly when they're in the third trimester. And so just like the regular flu, if a pregnant woman gets it, she tends to have a lot more problems because she just can't take deep breaths. She just doesn't have good lung capacity. And we've really kind of seen that, I think, with some people in the United States and also with some of the patients in Wuhan that got it, several months ago in the third trimester.
But I think it's also important to realize that nowhere, because most of our listeners are people who are probably struggling with infertility, that nowhere on the globe have they advised people not to get pregnant. So, I know when, especially the United States kind of shut down for 4 to 6 weeks early on in the COVID-19, a lot of people had to get their fertility treatments put on hold because, facilities weren't allowed to be opened and different things like that. And, there hasn't been a call for people to be avoiding pregnancy, like what we saw a few years back when Zika virus was kind of on the rampage. And so, it's scary. I mean, there's everything about COVID-19 is scary to me. Most importantly, what we don't know, as you were kind of alluding to. But what we do know is, it's there's no rhyme or reason who it's going to affect badly.
I'm pretty much telling everybody, get their flu vaccine, avoid any of the respiratory anything, because all of the respiratory diseases, like you said, hit pregnant women more than their non-pregnant counterparts. And I've been telling all my pregnant ladies, look, even when they lift the quarantine stipulations, you guys are the last to come out of quarantine. Don't go visiting people, be really cautious, be very, very judicious about where you go and what you do, because you don't really get second chances. And, go to work, go to the grocery store, do what you need to do, but be very, very cautious.
Yeah.
Well, and I think at this point too, one of the things that is somewhat reassuring is we don't think there's great evidence support the fact that there's any transmission between the mom and the baby through the placenta. Right now, we think that's probably okay, but I'm sure as the months go on, we'll find out more and more information about that, both from our country and other countries as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, now let's talk about genetics.
Okay, so this is, at least in part, just a little bit of a tease, because you know how we tease, for some of our episodes coming up where we're working with some really talented,
smart,
and just disgustingly smart scientists who work with our embryos, who work with the genetic testing component of it. And so starting to delve into that. And first wanted to go through what type of genetic testing are we able to do and get a little bit more familiar with those terms and what that is. So,
well, and the other thing is they speak a completely different language than we do. We do speak medical kind of, but they speak a different level of medical than we do. So we kind of joke that we need to kind of learn some things.
They speak sciencey medical.
Right. Yeah.
We talk people medical.
We're like slang medical. They're like much stricter medical. So we're going to try and break down some of the terms. And we throw a lot of terms around when patients come to see us. And one of the terms, I'll just lead right into this, is PGT, or preimplantation genetic testing. And so essentially
can we back up for just a minute and do a quick review of high school biology?
Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
So Abby, what's a chromosome?
A chromosome, if you remember back to high school biology, that X-shaped structure, it looks like a big X. That's a chromosome. And we all have 23 pairs of those chromosomes. The only thing that differs between men and women have 2 X chromosomes and men have an X and a Y.
Okay. Susan, what's a gene?
So the genes are the things that are in the chromosomes that kind of program them. So the way that I always explain it to patients is when we are testing chromosomes versus genes, and we're going to be talking a lot more about this in a few minutes. When I'm asking about chromosomes, I have 2 hands. When I'm looking at genes, I have 10 fingers. So the fingers are parts of the hands, but they're a component of it.
Okay. And when you're looking at a baby, how much of their genetic material is coming from each parent?
Half and half.
Excellent. And what is DNA?
DNA is the building block of the chromosome. It basically, if you take a bunch of DNA and wind it up and keep winding and winding, eventually it becomes a chromosome.
Okay. And then before we get into the PGT, want to do a quick talk about what is pan-ethnic carrier screening, because that is something that we do on the parents before we get to the embryo stage. And so some of what we do there leads into what we do later. And equally as importantly, some of what we see there has absolutely nothing to do with what we can do later.
So what Carrie was talking about, the pan-ethnic carrier screening. So the carrier word means you're a carrier of a gene. Okay. So what we're really looking at when we're looking at genes, we have
but we're carriers of a lot of genes, though, right? We carry a lot of genes.
Right. We have a lot of genes. So on these screening panels, they screen for generally, they can screen for just a few genes, or they can screen for upwards of almost 300 genes. Okay. And most of these genes that they are taking a look at are what we call recessive genes. When we look at genes, we have dominant genes and we have recessive genes. Dominant genes, you only need 1 copy for you to end up with that particular disease. And those are generally not the things that we're testing for on these tests. What we're looking for is recessive conditions, recessive genes, where you actually have to inherit 1 recessive copy or a bad copy from mom and a recessive copy from dad. Put those 2 together and you can end up with a condition. So these are medical conditions that can hide in somebody's family tree for generations until the right person meets the right person. And most of these genes that we're testing for are for things that cause severe disability of some sort, especially in babies, children, that type of thing.
So Susan, a lot of times when I talk to patients about doing, and I call it expanded carrier screening, another term for it. When I talk to patients about doing that, the response I get probably, maybe 70% of the time is, we don't have a family history of that. So how do you respond to that question?
That's exactly the thing, is that until the right person meets the right person, you're not going to have a family history. These things can stay hidden for generation to generation to generation, number 1. Number 2, quite honestly, beyond our parents and maybe our grandparents, most of us have no idea what the medical conditions were of our great-grandparents, extended family, etc. And also, as I was talking about, these tend to be really kind of big deal types of diseases. A lot of these things 100 years ago, 150 years ago, would have resulted in stillbirth or infant mortality, which we would have just been like, they had a baby that died at age 2, and nobody would know that it was spinal muscular atrophy or whatever the condition truly was that led to that child's death. It was, unfortunately, there were lots of things that led to, infant and child mortality, just 100 years ago.
All right.
Well, and I always say too, it's kind of, I think Ancestry.com does a great job.
So go ahead, Abby.
So I was going to say Ancestry.com does a great job of essentially showing us that we really don't know what our family history is much past a generation or 2. And so, even if you don't think you carry something, there's just really no way that you know. And it's really amazing to me how many people do carry an abnormal trait. I know I carry 2 abnormal traits. I actually found out that I have a recessive condition. Fortunately, it hasn't impacted me in probably won't, but it's just really amazing to me that we all carry some crazy genes that we didn't know we carried. And so it's only through testing that we can figure it out. And, a lot of times when we talk about doing genetic testing on embryos, we have to really know what we need to test before we can actually do it. So for example, if you carry a trait like cystic fibrosis, we have to really know that we're looking for that. We can't just screen all the embryos for that. We have to really know that we're looking for that. So I think it's a great test, and I think it's really helpful for a lot of our patients.
Another thing for people to keep in mind is just because you do the testing, we're going to be talking about things like PGT, preimplantation genetic testing. When we're talking about carrier screening, though, just because you do the carrier screening doesn't mean you have to do IVF if you find out that you're both carriers. It's to give you information, to give you power and a voice. So if you know there's a 25% chance that you may have a child with cystic fibrosis or spinal muscular atrophy or Smith-Limley-Opitz or whatever disease it is, you may need to make choices for you, your family, your child that you would not otherwise know that you need to make. And then you'd have to make them in a hasty way, like, oh my goodness, everybody's life is amazingly changed when this baby comes into the world. And now not only do I have this big change, but now I have to think about all these other things. Whereas, okay, I've had time to prepare that I know I need to have a special pediatrician. I know I may need to decide on different way. I may have been planning on my child being taken care of by a nanny or being in daycare or whatever. And maybe this health implication may say we have to do one way or the other, something that I wasn't expecting. So it can give you information to make you prepared as well.
Well, and plus they say too that sometimes when people have a baby with something like spinal muscular atrophy or something like that, it's really hard to pinpoint what the problem is. And so a lot of times parents will go on a medical odyssey, and it may take them, a visit to 6 or 8 different medical professionals.
So what Abby was saying is she cut out because I think her microphone decided it was going on vacation right at this instant. They'll go on a medical odyssey of going from doc to doc to doc to try and figure out what's going on, because you can have one of these syndromes where there's something with the gut, there's something with the brain, there's something with the muscle development, there's something with breathing. There's a little bit of something with a little bit of every system, but it's not concrete with everything. And so it takes much, much longer to get the diagnosis. Whereas if you have it ahead of time, then you can go straight to targeting how to make life better and more livable for everybody, not just the kiddo, but also the parents and all the caregivers as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
All right. So let's get into a little bit more of the description of PGT and what that is and what it can do and what it can't do and what the alphabet soup of PGT is. So Susan, what's the basic premise of PGT?
So the basic premise of PGT is that when we're doing IVF or in vitro fertilization, when we have embryos that get to an advanced stage called an expanded blastocyst, and that's generally a day 5, 6, or 7 embryo, we can tell which part of the embryo is going to become the baby and which part of the embryo is going to become the placenta. And we can take a few of the cells that are going to become the placenta and send those cells to a lab. And then we generally cryopreserve the embryo, send those cells to a lab to find out most commonly whether those embryos are chromosomally normal or not. And that is what we call PGT-A. A is for aneuploidy, just a fancy word for abnormal number of chromosomes. And so that's what we see most commonly in the IVF field, because we know that even when people are in their 20s, about half of the embryos they create are chromosomally abnormal. As women age and approach their mid 40s, that number can get upwards of 90%.
Okay. So PGTA is really good at checking the total number of chromosomes. It is not good at checking a specific gene like cystic fibrosis or spinal muscular atrophy or one of those really specific tiny little fingers compared to checking for the whole hand.
Exactly. And that is PGTM, where we're looking at the genes.
Okay. So tell us about PGTM.
So PGTM, it does take us a little bit more prep work when we know that we're looking for this. So first of all, sometimes people are worried about us like trying to create like this genetically perfect baby. Like it's just not feasibly possible, and we don't do something like that. We only go looking for these genes when we've done some carrier screening like we've talked about before, or in a situation where perhaps a couple have already had a child that's affected and that's how they found out they were carriers. And so what we can do is when we know that each parent is a carrier, there can get blood or saliva samples from each of the parents. And generally they want to get blood and saliva from siblings or parents of the intended parents. And essentially the lab creates what's called a probe. And this probe, when we send off those little cells, are used to help identify if that genetic mutation is present in the embryos. And if we have no copies of the recessive gene, if we have one copy, or if we have two. And generally speaking, as long as we have one or none, then those are going to give us embryos that are going to give us a good chance of having a baby that is not affected by that disease.
Okay. And then the last type of PGT that we're looking at is PGT-SR, which is structural rearrangements. And this, I actually think it's really cool because when you're looking at a karyotype, and a karyotype is the arrangement of all the chromosomes, if you were to, literally take a picture of them in all of their disorganized glory and then organize them and pair them up and label them from biggest down to littlest down to the sex chromosomes. And what happens with the structural rearrangements is that two of them stick together where they really shouldn't stick together. And so let's say one of the more common ones, like a Robertsonian translocation, that's where chromosome number 14 and chromosome number 21 hang out together and they're stuck together. And so
they did a little dance.
And they did a little dance. And so sometimes you get lucky and it separates out so that even though they're stuck together, you still end up with the right amount of everything. But more often what you see is that there is too much or too little genetic material. And that is particularly scary in that particular translocation because chromosome 21, when you have too much of it, it's associated with Down syndrome. And so when we are looking at that type of rearrangement, you're looking to see, okay, do you have too much or too little of those specific chromosomes that are the ones in question?
And those are most commonly, we find those when we're looking at couples who have recurrent pregnancy loss. Those are the ones that are most likely to be found in that type of situation.
All right. So let's try this again. Let's see if Abby's microphone wants to play with us anymore.
Yeah, I just decided I wanted to, go get some coffee and hang out for a while. Sorry to leave you guys to talk about genetics. Really, I just didn't know what you were talking about, so I thought I'd just take off. So hopefully my microphone will cooperate with me. It just kind of did its own thing there for a minute. So I missed some of the conversation, so you guys will have to fill me in.
So really, it's actually perfect timing because you came back in just enough time to explain the very hardest thing to explain verbally without pictures. So can you tell us about mosaicism in the next 3 minutes or so?
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem. Well, I'm not a very smart person, but the way I sort of think about it is, when we do genetic testing.
Oh, I think Abby's microphone is just going to...
No, she muted it.
No, it muted itself. I didn't mute it. I think the battery.
You were doing so well.
Yeah, no, hers keeps on muting. So, Carrie, you want to do mosaicism in 2 minutes or less?
Oh, man. Okay. So mosaicism, damn, Abby, your microphone, we're going to mail you a new one. So mosaicism is where you have 2 different cell lines present. And so it means that some of the cells that are there are totally normal, and some of the cells there may be, for sake of example, have Down syndrome in there. And that by itself is not necessarily a problem. It sounds weird to say that, but it really depends on what % is abnormal and where. And so if you have just Abby is in the background threatening her microphone, and it's really pretty amazing to watch. So if in the background of the cell, you have a little bit of abnormal, that's totally fine. However, if you have 50%, 70%, 90% of a different cell line that is not normal, that is a bigger problem. And that's what mosaicism is. And that's what we have a harder time interpreting, because the lower level mosaics we think are okay because we think the embryo can repair itself and the ultimate baby will be fine. The higher levels, we're pretty sure, okay, those aren't okay because they're more abnormal than normal. It's those middle levels that we don't quite know what to do with.
And if somebody has embryos that are mosaic, which, now that all of our reporting does report mosaics, our patients who are using PGT are, there's a decent chance that they might see that on a report. There are different, some chromosomes are more okay to transfer as mosaics than other chromosomes. So, that's something important for you to discuss with your doctor is if you do have mosaics, is it a high mosaic? Is it a low mosaic? But almost more importantly is which chromosome is it involving? That almost determines your path on whether or not it's a wise idea to try to transfer the mosaic or not. It's going to help lead you down that path. I can tell you that I have transferred some mosaics. I know not a lot of people have transferred mosaics, but I've had some people transfer mosaics and the children have ended up being happy, healthy little boys and girls out there. So there is hope for some of those mosaics out there.
And it's the knowingly versus not knowingly transfer them. We've all transferred them. It's whether or not we have known we have transferred them. And
exactly.
That's where the difference is. So, all right. Well, it has been a pleasure hanging out with you ladies, as it always is, and talking about the things that we talk about all day. But it's much more fun just chatting about it with 2 friends here and having girls' night in. So to our audience, thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in next week for more, and be sure to subscribe, leave a message in iTunes, leave reviews, and we would love to hear from you.
You can also visit fertilitydocs.uncensored.com to schedule an appointment with any of us or submit questions that you have about your infertility situation. We promise to answer your questions anonymously on our Ask the Doc segment, and please don't hold back. We really want to be there to help answer your questions. We'll see you soon.
All right, Abby, try and say goodbye.
Bye. It worked.
Bye, Abby.
Bye, everybody. Have a wonderful week.